On my wedding day, my in-laws mocked my dad in front of 500 people. They said, "That's not a father, that's trash." My fiancé laughed. I stood up and called off the wedding. My dad looked at me and said, "Daughter, I'm a billionaire." My entire life changed forever. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. Please comment M for morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. Now, let me take you into this story. I stood there in the middle of a world I had never truly belonged to, feeling the silk of my custom-made gown heavy against my skin. My name is Sarah Jenkins, 32 years old, a graphic designer who scraped by on a modest salary, and today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was dazzling, so bright it almost hurt my eyes. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like thousands of fallen stars hanging from the ceiling, casting a golden light over 500 guests. These weren't just any guests. They were business tycoons, politicians, and the elite of high society. They laughed and chatted loudly, clinking champagne glasses, talking about stocks, yachts, and summer vacations in Europe. I forced a smile onto my face, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. This was my wedding to Brad Sterling, the heir to the Sterling Corporation, and I knew full well that I was just an ordinary girl who had somehow slipped into their glittering orbit. My heart pounded as I scanned the crowd, searching for the one face that mattered to me. And then I saw him. My father, Frank Jenkins, 65 years old, walking in through the side entrance. My heart swelled with love, but then it immediately sank with a sharp pang of protectiveness. He was wearing the same old charcoal suit I remembered him buying more than 15 years ago for a funeral. It was clean and pressed, but the fabric was shiny with age, and the cut was hopelessly outdated. His worn leather shoes were scuffed, and his thin frame was slightly stooped, as if he was trying to make himself smaller in this grand room. He stood quietly in a far corner near the emergency exit, clutching his old fedora, looking terrified of disturbing anyone. His face was weathered from years of hard labor as a mechanic, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, but those eyes shone with a mixture of pride and anxiety. My dad had raised me single-handedly after my mom passed away when I was barely a toddler. He worked himself to the bone in his garage so I could have a good life. He never complained once. But today, in the middle of all this luxury, he looked heartbreakingly out of place. My throat tightened, dry and aching. I wanted to run to him right then and pull him into a proper seat in the front row. "Dad, why are you standing there all alone?" I thought, my heart twisting. He had sacrificed so much for me. He deserved respect. But before I could move, people started noticing. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a poisonous undercurrent. A group of women in glittering evening gowns turned to look, smirking behind their manicured hands. "Who is that?" one whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "He looks like he just wandered in from a homeless shelter." Fingers pointed. Eyes judged him like he was some strange, dirty object that had contaminated their elite party. I felt the blood rush to my face, burning hot. They were mocking my father, the man who taught me how to be decent, honest, and kind. My mother-in-law-to-be, Victoria Sterling, stood not far away. She was 60 but looked 40 thanks to expensive treatments, dripping in diamonds. She glanced at my dad with open disdain, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something foul. "Oh my God," she said, her voice shrill and carrying over the low hum of the crowd. "Someone call security. I think the gardener got lost." Her circle of friends burst into sharp, cutting laughter that stabbed straight into my heart. Victoria always pretended to be polite to my face, but I knew exactly what she thought of my family. Low-class people who didn't belong in the Sterling bloodline. I looked desperately at Brad. My fiancé. The man who had promised to love and cherish me. He was standing near his mother, looking handsome in his tuxedo. I expected him to step in, to defend the man who was about to become his father-in-law. But he didn't. Brad glanced at my dad, then at his mother, and let out a chuckle. "Yeah," he said, loud enough for his groomsmen to hear. "I told Sarah to buy him a new suit, but you know how these old country folks are. Stubborn as mules." Tiffany, Brad's younger sister, rolled her eyes and laughed, snapping a picture on her phone. "That's not a father," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "That's trash. He's ruining the aesthetic of the entire wedding." The laughter grew louder. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. I saw my dad standing frozen amid the roaring laughter, his face red, his eyes lowered to the floor, clinging to the last shred of his dignity. He looked so small. So defeated. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a slow break, it was an explosion. A rage I didn't know I possessed burned through my chest, consuming the fear, the insecurity, the desire to please these awful people. I looked at Brad, laughing along with his family at the man who had starved himself so I could have new school books. I looked at Victoria, checking her reflection in a spoon. I looked at Tiffany, posting my father's humiliation online. I tore the expensive lace veil from my hair. I grabbed the bridal bouquet of imported white roses, flowers that cost more than my dad's weekly grocery budget, and I threw them to the floor with a violent crash. "Enough!" I screamed. The sound tore through the room, silencing the laughter instantly. 500 faces turned to me, shock replacing their amusement. I stood there, breathing hard, my hands trembling, but my voice was steady. I looked straight at Brad, who now looked confused, his smile faltering. "I am calling off the wedding," I declared, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The entire hall fell dead silent. If you are still listening, please like this video and comment the number 1 below. It lets me know you are amazing and that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me. Comment 1 so I can see you, and now, let me tell you what happened next. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, suffocating. It hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into a tidal wave of voices, every eye fixed on me, the madwoman who had just spoken the unthinkable. "What is going on?" someone cried out in panic from the front row. "Is this part of the ceremony?" Brad's face went white as a sheet, then flushed crimson with rage. He stepped toward me, his hands reaching out as if to grab me, to shake me back into submission. "Sarah, have you lost your mind?" he hissed, his voice low but vibrating with fury. "Stop this drama right now. You are embarrassing me." "Embarrassing you?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound that hurt my throat. "You just stood there and laughed while your family treated my father like garbage. You think I'm embarrassing you?" Victoria stepped forward, her refined mask slipping to reveal the ugliness underneath. "You ungrateful little brat," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? You don't get to just call it off because you're feeling sensitive." "It's not about being sensitive, Victoria," I shot back, using her first name for the first time ever. "It's about basic human decency. Something your family clearly knows nothing about." I turned my back on them, ignoring Brad's shouting, and walked straight toward the corner where my father stood. He looked terrified, his eyes wide with shock. "Sarah, honey," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't do this. Not for me. I can leave. I'll go wait in the truck. Please, don't ruin your future." My heart broke all over again. Even now, he was trying to protect me. He was willing to disappear just so I could be part of this toxic world. I took his rough, calloused hands in mine. They were warm and familiar, the hands that had braided my hair, fixed my bicycle, and held me when I cried over a broken heart. "No, Dad," I said loud enough for the room to hear. "I'm not ruining my future. I'm saving it." I looked back at the altar, where Brad was now being restrained by his best man, looking more angry than heartbroken. "I would rather be the daughter of a poor man with honor," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, "than the wife of a rich man with no soul. The wedding is over. Tiffany booed loudly. Good riddance. Go back to the trailer park where you belong. Richard Sterling, my almost father-in-law, a man who intimidated everyone with his cold stare, boomed, If you walk out those doors, Sarah, you will regret it. You'll be nothing. We will make sure you never work in this town again. I paused, feeling the threat hang in the air. A lawyer would probably tell me to be careful, but I didn't care about their power anymore. I'd rather be nothing than be one of you, I replied calmly. I took my father's arm. Let's go home, Dad. He hesitated, looking at the angry faces, the security guards starting to move toward us, and then he nodded. He straightened his spine, lifting his chin just a fraction, and together, we walked down the aisle. It wasn't the walk down the aisle I had dreamed of. There was no Here Comes the Bride playing, no flowers being thrown. Just the sound of my heels clicking on the marble and the shocked murmurs of 500 people witnessing the collapse of the Sterling Jenkins Union. We stepped out of the hotel ballroom and into the lobby, ignoring the concierge who looked at us with wide eyes. I didn't stop until we pushed through the revolving doors and felt the cool air of the afternoon hit our faces. Behind us, I could hear Victoria screaming about lawsuits and Brad shouting my name, but the sounds were fading. My truck is around the back, Dad said softly. Valet wouldn't take it. Of course they wouldn't, I muttered. We walked to the back lot, past the rows of Bentleys and Porsches, to where his rusted blue pickup truck was parked, looking like a stubborn survivor in a sea of luxury. I climbed into the passenger seat, gathering the yards of white silk and tulle of my wedding dress around me, trying to fit it into the cramped cab. It felt ridiculous. A $20,000 dress in a truck that was barely worth $2,000. Dad climbed in the driver's side and started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a familiar rumble. As we pulled out of the lot, I looked in the side mirror. I saw Brad running out of the hotel entrance, looking frantic. But I didn't tell Dad to stop. I watched him get smaller and smaller until he was just a speck in the distance, and then, he was gone. The drive out of the city was quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, not because there's nothing to say, but because there is too much. The interior of the truck smelled like it always did, a mix of old leather, peppermint gum, and machine oil. It was the scent of my childhood, a smell that used to make me feel safe. Today, it just made me want to cry. I stared out the window as the skyline of the city, with all its high-rise condos and corporate offices, faded into the rearview mirror. We were heading toward the outskirts, toward the small, run-down neighborhood where I grew up. My hands were shaking in my lap. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I had just blown up my life. I had walked away from a man I thought I loved, a lifestyle most people would kill for, and a future that was supposed to be secure. I looked over at Dad. He was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He hadn't said a word since we left the hotel. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw set. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. He glanced at me, his eyes softening. Sorry? Sarah, you have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I shouldn't have come. I knew I wouldn't fit in. I wanted to see you walk down the aisle. No, Dad, I said fiercely, wiping a tear that had escaped. You are my father. You had every right to be there. They had no right to treat you like that. And Brad, he just let it happen. Dad sighed, a long, weary sound. People like them, they live in a different world, honey. They don't see people like us. We're just background noise to them. Or trash to be swept away. I don't care about their world, I said, pulling at the lace of my dress. I hate it. I hate them. But as I said it, a wave of grief washed over me. Because the truth was, I had wanted to be part of it. I had loved Brad. Or at least, I loved who I thought he was. I thought about the apartment we shared, the plans we had made for our honeymoon in Bora Bora, the names we had picked out for our future children. All of it, gone in an instant. What am I going to do now? I asked, more to myself than to him. I gave up my lease. I quit my job because Brad wanted me to focus on the wedding and charity work. I have nothing. Dad reached over and patted my knee awkwardly. You have me. You have the house. It's not much, I know. The roof leaks a bit in the kitchen, and the heating is temperamental, but it's home. You can stay as long as you need. I looked at him, feeling a surge of gratitude so strong it hurt. He barely had enough money to keep the lights on, living on a small pension and whatever he made fixing cars in the neighborhood, yet he offered me everything he had without hesitation. I'll get a job, I said, trying to sound confident. I'm a good designer. I can freelance. I'll help with the bills. Don't worry about the bills, he said quickly. We'll manage. We always do. We drove in silence for a while longer. The fancy paved roads turned into cracked asphalt, and the manicured lawns were replaced by overgrown yards and chain-link fences. Dad, I said softly. Did you hear what Tiffany said? About the shoes? He flinched slightly. I heard. Why didn't you buy new ones? I sent you money last month specifically for the suit and shoes. There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable silence. I had some expenses come up, he muttered, avoiding my eyes. The truck needed parts. And Mrs. Higgins down the street, her boiler broke, and she didn't have the cash, so I helped her out. I sighed, shaking my head. That was my dad. He would give the shirt off his back to a stranger even if he was freezing. It was his greatest virtue and his greatest flaw. You're too good, Dad, I said, leaning my head against the cool glass of the window. That's why they hate you. You make them look bad just by existing. As we pulled into the driveway of the small, wooden house with peeling white paint, reality settled in. This wasn't the Ritz-Carlton. This was my reality now. No more servants, no more luxury cars, no more black cards. But as the engine cut out and the quiet of the neighborhood wrapped around us, just the sound of crickets and a distant dog barking, I realized something strange. My chest felt lighter. The suffocating pressure to be perfect, to say the right thing, to wear the right clothes, it was gone. I was sitting in a rusted truck in a wedding dress that cost more than the house in front of me, next to a man who wore 15-year-old shoes. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt free. As I stared at the peeling paint of my childhood home, my mind drifted back. How did I get here? How did I let myself get so blind? It started 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in a coffee shop. I was working on a logo design on my laptop, stressed about a deadline, when he walked in. Brad Sterling. He looked like he had stepped out of a GQ magazine, tall, broad shoulders, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing a suit that screamed promotion and success. He accidentally bumped my table, spilling my latte all over my sketchbook. Oh God, I am so sorry, he said, grabbing napkins and dabbing at the mess with frantic elegance. I'm such a clumsy idiot. Please, let me buy you another one. And let me replace the sketchbook. That was how it began. He was charming, funny, and incredibly attentive. He didn't act like the rich snob I later found out he was. He told me he worked in sales, that he was trying to prove himself to his father. He made me feel special. Within weeks, we were inseparable. And that's when the love bombing started. I didn't know the term back then, I just thought it was romance. He sent flowers to my tiny apartment every day. Not just a bouquet, but massive arrangements of lilies and orchids. He took me to dinners at restaurants where the menu didn't have prices. He listened to me talk about my dreams of starting my own design firm with an intensity that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. You're so talented, Sarah, he would say, stroking my hair. You shouldn't be wasting your time with these small clients. You're destined for bigger things. I can help you. He made me feel safe. I had grown up struggling, watching my dad count pennies at the kitchen table, wearing hand-me-down clothes. Brad represented security. He was a solid rock I could lean on. But there were signs. Red flags that I painted white because I wanted the fairy tale to be real. I remember one night, about 3 months into our relationship. We were at a French bistro downtown. The waiter, a young kid who looked terrified, accidentally brought Brad sparkling water instead of still. Brad's charming smile vanished instantly. His eyes went cold. Can you not read? He snapped at the kid. I said still. Is it that hard to do your job? Maybe if you paid attention, you wouldn't be waiting tables. The kid stammered an apology, looking like he was about to cry. I felt a knot in my stomach. Brad, it's okay, I whispered, reaching for his hand. It's just water. Don't be so hard on him. Brad pulled his hand away, his face twisting in annoyance. It's not about the water, Sarah. It's about standards. If you accept mediocrity, you get mediocrity. That's why some people stay at the bottom. He looked at me when he said it, and for a second, I felt like he was talking about me. About my dad. But then, just as quickly, the mask slipped back on. He smiled, that dazzling, movie star smile. I just want the best for us, babe. You deserve the best service. I swallowed my discomfort. He's just stressed, I told myself. He has a high-pressure job. Then there were the gifts. Expensive handbags, jewelry, designer shoes. At first, I was overwhelmed. Brad, this is too much, I'd say. I can't accept this. Nonsense, he'd reply. You're my girl. You need to look the part. Besides, my mother notices these things. I want you to impress her. Look the part. That phrase should have terrified me. He wasn't dressing me because he loved my style, he was dressing me like a doll to fit into his diorama. Slowly, subtly, he started changing me. Maybe don't wear that dress to the gala, it looks a bit cheap, he'd suggest. Or, why don't you let me pay for a hairstylist? Your natural curls are a bit messy for this event. And the isolation. Why do you want to go to your dad's for Thanksgiving? He asked the first year. His house is so drafty, and the food is, well, simple. Come to Aspen with my family. We're taking the private jet. It'll be an experience. I went to Aspen. I left my dad alone with a turkey sandwich because I wanted to please Brad. I wanted to belong to his world. I convinced myself that Dad didn't mind, that he wanted me to have fun. Driving back to my dad's house now, in the silence of the aftermath, the guilt hit me like a physical blow. I had traded my father's loneliness for a ticket to a world that never truly wanted me. I had fallen in love with a mirage. Brad didn't love Sarah Jenkins, the graphic designer. He loved the accessory he had molded me into. And the moment that accessory stepped out of line and defended her trash father, the illusion shattered. The closer we got to the wedding, the more the mask of the Sterling family slipped. I remember the first time I met his parents, Richard and Victoria. It wasn't at a warm family dinner. It was at their estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. I walked in wearing a dress Brad had bought me, clutching a homemade apple pie I had baked as a peace offering. Dad always taught me never to show up empty-handed. Victoria opened the door, looked at the pie, and gave a tight, thin-lipped smile. Oh, how rustic. We have a private chef, dear, but I suppose the staff might enjoy this. She handed it off to a maid without even smelling it. Dinner was an interrogation. Richard sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak with surgical precision. So, Sarah, he said, not looking up. Brad tells me your father is a mechanic. Does he own a chain of garages? No, sir, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He has a small shop attached to our house. Just him. I see, Richard said. The way he said it made it sound like I had admitted to a crime. And you went to state college? Yes, on a scholarship. Commendable, Victoria chimed in, swirling her wine. Though Brad went to Wharton. We value pedigree in this family. I felt small. I felt like I was being weighed and measured and found wanting. But Brad just squeezed my hand under the table. She's talented, Mom. She's going to be a great asset. Asset. Not wife. Not partner. Asset. The breaking point should have been the prenuptial agreement. 2 weeks before the wedding, Brad drove me to a sleek glass building downtown. Just a quick meeting with the family lawyer, he said breezily. Standard procedure. We walked into a conference room that smelled of leather and intimidation. A lawyer with a shark-like smile slid a thick document across the table. Sign here, here, and here, he said. I started reading. It was brutal. If we divorced, I got nothing. No alimony, no claim to the house, not even the gifts he had given me. There were clauses about weight gain, clauses about public appearances, and a terrifying clause about custody of future children that basically said the Sterlings would have primary rights because of their superior financial stability. Brad, I whispered, my hands trembling. This says if we divorce, I leave with literally nothing. And the custody clause, it says your parents would have more rights to our kids than I would. Brad sighed, looking annoyed. Sarah, don't be dramatic. It's just to protect the family assets. My parents insist on it. It's not like we're planning to get divorced. But this. I pointed to a paragraph. It says I can't work without your permission? Brad, this is controlling. Victoria walked in then, looking impeccable in a Chanel suit. She sat down, crossing her legs. Sarah, let's be realistic, she said coldly. You are marrying into a dynasty. You bring nothing to this marriage financially. We need to ensure that you aren't just digging for gold. I love Brad, I said, tears stinging my eyes. I don't care about your money. Then prove it, Victoria snapped. Sign the paper. If you don't care about the money, then walking away with nothing shouldn't scare you. It was a trap. A logic trap designed to corner me. If I refused, I was a gold digger. If I signed, I was a prisoner. I looked at Brad. He was checking his watch. Babe, come on. We have a tasting appointment in an hour. Just sign it so we can go. I signed it. God help me, I signed it. I told myself it was for love. I told myself that once we were married, once I gave them grandchildren, they would soften. They would see I was a good person. I was so desperate for their approval, so desperate to be safe, that I signed away my rights, my future children, and my dignity. Sitting in the truck now, remembering the scratch of that pen on the paper, I felt sick. I had sold myself. And for what? To be humiliated in front of 500 people? To have my father, the only man who truly loved me, treated like a stray dog? We're here, Dad's voice broke through my memories. I looked up. The truck had stopped in front of the small garage. The house looked even smaller than I remembered, the porch light flickering. But for the first time in 3 years, it didn't look like a place to escape from. It looked like a fortress. And I realized, as I unbuckled my seatbelt, that the prenup didn't matter anymore. Because there would be no marriage. The contract was void. I had escaped the cage right before the door locked. We walked into the house, the wooden floorboards creaking under my feet. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and loneliness. It was clear Dad hadn't been living much in the main rooms. He probably spent all his time in the garage or his small bedroom. I sat down on the worn-out plaid sofa, the wedding dress billowing around me like a cloud in a dark room. I felt exhausted, drained to my very soul. "I'll make some tea," Dad said, shuffling toward the kitchen. I watched him go. His shoulders were slumped, his step heavy. I felt a pang of guilt. I had dragged him into this mess. He had stood there and taken their insults for me. "Dad," I called out. "I'm so sorry I didn't defend you sooner. I should have stopped them the moment Victoria opened her mouth." He came back with 2 mugs of steaming tea, placing them on the coffee table that had a wobbly leg propped up by a folded magazine. "You did the right thing in the end, Sarah," he said, sitting in his old armchair. "That's what matters. You stood up. You showed them who you are." He took a sip of tea, then looked at me with a strange intensity. His eyes, usually soft and kind, were sharp, clear. The vibe in the room shifted. The air felt charged, heavier. "Sarah," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "There is something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My heart skipped a beat. Was he sick? Was that why he looked so tired? "What is it, Dad? Are you okay?" He stood up slowly. "Wait here." He walked into his bedroom. I heard the sound of a closet door opening, then the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. A minute later, he emerged carrying a dented, gray metal lockbox. It looked like the kind of box you'd keep spare change or old photos in. He placed it on the coffee table between us. The metal clanged against the wood. "I didn't want you to know," he said, staring at the box. "I wanted you to grow up normal. I wanted you to value hard work. I wanted you to find a man who loved you for you, not for this." "Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "Is this Mom's jewelry?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key on a string. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted it into the lock. Click. He opened the lid. Inside, there were no jewels. Just papers. Stacks and stacks of papers. Some yellowed with age, some crisp and new. He picked up a thick folder and handed it to me. "Read the balance," he said softly. I opened the folder. It was a bank statement from a private wealth management firm in New York. I looked at the name, Frank Jenkins. Then I looked at the bottom line. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. $42 million. 42 million? I whispered. My voice squeaked. "Dad, is this a typo?" He didn't answer. He handed me another document. A deed to a commercial property in downtown San Francisco. Another deed for 1,000 acres of farmland in Montana. Stock certificates. Apple. Amazon. Berkshire Hathaway. Dates going back to the 1990s. I flipped through the papers, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped them. The numbers were staggering. Tens of millions here, hundreds of thousands there. "I don't understand," I stammered, looking around the shabby living room with the peeling wallpaper. We clipped coupons. I wore second-hand clothes. You drive a truck that barely runs. Dad, this says you have assets worth over $1 billion. 1.2 billion, as of last quarter, he corrected gently, as if stating the weather. I stared at him. The man in the cheap suit. The man the Sterlings called trash. The man who fixed radiators for $50. "You're a billionaire?" I breathed out, the world spinning around me. You are a billionaire?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, daughter. I am." "But, why?" I gestured wildly at the house, at his clothes, at my life. Why did we live like this? Why did you let me struggle to pay my student loans? Why did you let them humiliate you today? He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Because money is a drug, Sarah. It corrupts. I saw what it did to people. I didn't want it to ruin you. I wanted you to build your own character. He paused, his face darkening. And as for today, I needed to know. I needed to see if Brad and his family were worthy of you. I needed to see if you were strong enough to walk away from the glitter if it meant keeping your soul. He reached out and took my hand. You passed the test, Sarah. You chose your poor, old dad over the sterling fortune. You proved your heart is pure. He sat back, a small, mischievous smile playing on his lips, a smile I had never seen before. And now, he said, his voice hardening into something steely and dangerous, it's time we teach the Sterlings a lesson about what trash can actually do. I sat there, stunned into silence. The pile of documents on the coffee table seemed to glow with a radioactive energy. $1 billion. It was a number so large it didn't feel real. It felt like monopoly money. How? I finally managed to ask. Just, how? You're a mechanic, Dad. Frank leaned back, crossing his legs. He suddenly didn't look like a tired old man anymore. There was a sharpness in his posture, a clarity in his eyes that I realized he had been hiding for years. It started with your mother, he began, his voice softening with nostalgia. You know she came from a good family, but they cut her off when she married me. A blue-collar boy. But she had a trust fund from her grandmother that they couldn't touch. When she died. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. When she died, that money came to me. It wasn't $1 billion, Sarah. It was about $2 million. He looked at the fireplace, watching the cold ashes. I was broken. I had a toddler, no wife, and a hole in my heart. I kept working at the garage because it gave me something to do with my hands. It kept me sane. But at night? While you were sleeping? He pointed to the corner of the room where an old, dusty computer sat on a desk. I read. I studied. I became obsessed with the stock market. This was the early 90s, Sarah. The tech boom was just starting. I took your mother's money and I put it into companies that people thought were risky. Microsoft. Dell. Later, Amazon and Google. He chuckled dryly. I remember buying Amazon when everyone said bookstores were dead. I just had a feeling. I watched the charts like a hawk. I compounded the interest. I reinvested everything. I lived on my mechanic's wages and let the capital grow. But the student loans, I pressed, feeling a flicker of resentment. I worked 2 jobs in college, Dad. I ate ramen for 4 years. I know, he said, and his eyes were sad. And it killed me to watch it. I almost wrote a check 1,000 times. But Sarah, look at Tiffany Sterling. She's never worked a day in her life. She's cruel, entitled, and useless. If I had given you everything, would you be the woman you are today? Would you have the grit to start your own design business? Would you have the courage to stand up to 500 people today? I thought about Tiffany. I thought about Brad, who crumbled the moment things got hard. I thought about myself, my resilience, my ability to solve problems, my appreciation for the small things. No, I whispered. I would have been like them. Exactly, Dad said. I was saving this for you. Not for a lifestyle, but for freedom. True freedom. The kind where no one can buy you, and no one can own you. He picked up a document. I set up a college fund for you, but when you got that scholarship, I just reinvested it. It's worth about $5 million on its own now. My jaw dropped. 5 million? That's your safety net I never told you about. But the rest? He swept his hand over the stack. This is leverage. This is power. He looked at me, his expression shifting from fatherly to businesslike. I've been watching the Sterling Corporation, Sarah. I knew Brad was bad news the moment I met him. He doesn't look at you, he looks at your reflection in the mirror to see how you make him look. But I did my due diligence. He pulled out a different folder. This one wasn't financial statements. It was a dossier. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago, he admitted. You did what? I needed to know who my daughter was marrying. And what I found, well, the Sterling Empire isn't as solid as they pretend. They are over-leveraged. They have massive debt. They need this marriage because they thought. He laughed. They didn't think you had money, but they thought you were manageable. A trophy wife who wouldn't ask questions while they scrambled to fix their books. He opened the dossier. Brad isn't just a jerk, Sarah. He's incompetent. He's been hiding losses in the Asian division for 2 years. If the shareholders knew, the stock would tank. I picked up the report. Charts, emails, photos. It was all there. You knew all this? I asked, feeling a chill. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? He asked gently. You were in love. You were planning a wedding. If I told you Brad was a fraud, you would have hated me. You had to see it for yourself. You had to see his character. He was right. I was so blinded by Brad's charm, I would have defended him. I had to see him laugh at my father to truly understand who he was. So, Dad said, leaning forward. We have a choice. We can take this money, buy a nice house in Italy, and forget the Sterlings ever existed. Live happily ever after. He paused, a glint in his eye. Or, we can use this. He tapped the bank statement. We can buy their debt. We can buy their shares while they are panicking. We can take everything they have, legally, publicly, and totally. I looked at the papers. I thought about Victoria's sneer. I thought about Tiffany calling my dad trash. I thought about Brad's laughter. I looked at my dad, the billionaire mechanic, offering me the sword. The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of a chessboard before the first move. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging by the door. I looked at myself. My makeup was smudged, my hair was a mess where the veil had been torn off, and I was still wearing the white dress that now felt like a costume of a foolish girl. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer. Sarah? Dad asked, watching me. I took the long, lace train of the dress, the train Victoria had insisted on because it looked regal, and I slashed it. The sound of ripping fabric was satisfying. I cut the dress until it was tea-length, jagged and raw. I wiped the smeared mascara from under my eyes with my thumb. I wasn't the sad, rejected bride anymore. I was Sarah Jenkins, daughter of Frank Jenkins, and I was worth $1.2 billion. I don't want to go to Italy, Dad, I said, turning to him. My voice was steady, cold. Not yet. Dad smiled. It was a wolfish smile. I was hoping you'd say that. They humiliated us, I said, pacing the room. They treated you like dirt. They tried to make me sign a contract that would leave me destitute. They think they are the kings and queens of the world because they have money. I picked up the bank statement. But they don't have this kind of money. No, Dad said. They don't. Richard Sterling is worth maybe $50 million on paper, but most of it is tied up in the company. And the company is bleeding. Then let's make it bleed faster, I said. I sat down at the table, pushing the wedding flowers, a single wilted rose I had unknowingly carried in from the truck, aside. How do we do it? I asked. I know design, Dad. I don't know corporate takeovers. That's where I come in, Dad said, cracking his knuckles. I've been a silent partner in firms for 20 years. I know the game. We set up a shell company. Let's call it Phoenix Holdings. Phoenix, I repeated. Rising from the ashes. I like it. We start buying their debt, Dad outlined the plan, his voice dropping into a strategic rhythm. The banks are nervous about Sterling Corp already. If a new investor comes in offering to buy the bad loans, the banks will sell for pennies on the dollar. Then, we start buying the stock. Slowly. Small chunks so we don't trigger an alert. When the next quarterly report comes out, the one showing Brad's losses, the stock will drop. That's when we strike. We buy the controlling stake. And then? And then, Dad said, we call a shareholders meeting. And we introduce the new owners. A shiver of anticipation ran down my spine. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. It was the funeral of the old Sarah, the one who apologized for taking up space. I need to change, I said. I can't look like this. If we are going to do this, I need to look the part. Not the doll Brad wanted, but the woman who owns him. Take the black card, Dad said, sliding a sleek, heavy card made of anodized titanium across the table. Go to the city tomorrow. Get a new wardrobe. Get a lawyer. A shark. Not the family friend lawyer, get the guy who sues the family friend lawyer. I picked up the card. It was cold to the touch. Dad, I said, looking at him. Thank you. For saving it. For saving me. You saved yourself, kiddo, he said. Now, go get some sleep. We have a company to buy in the morning. I went to my old bedroom, the twin bed looking so small now. I lay down, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from my childhood. My phone had been buzzing non-stop in my purse. I finally fished it out. 47 missed calls from Brad. 20 from Victoria. Hundreds of notifications from social media, videos of me throwing the bouquet were already viral. I opened a text from Brad, Sarah, stop this madness. Come back. We can fix this. You're ruining everything. I didn't reply. I didn't block him either. I wanted him to wonder. I wanted him to sweat. I turned off the phone and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the mechanic's daughter was going shopping. And she wasn't looking for a wedding dress. She was looking for a war paint. The game was on. The Sterlings wanted a show? I was going to give them the greatest show of their lives. But this time, they wouldn't be laughing. The next morning, the sun rose over our small, peeling neighborhood just like it always did, but the world felt different. It felt sharper. I woke up not with the heavy dread of a woman whose heart had been broken, but with the buzzing energy of a woman on a mission. I walked into the kitchen to find Dad already there. He wasn't wearing his usual grease-stained jumpsuit. He was wearing a crisp white button-down shirt and reading the Wall Street Journal on a tablet. It was a jarring sight, seeing the mechanic look like a CEO in a kitchen with linoleum floors. Coffee, he offered, pointing to the pot. Then we get to work. I've already contacted my broker in Zurich. Phoenix Holdings is officially registered. That was fast, I said, pouring a mug. Money moves fast, Sarah. Only poverty is slow, he replied, a phrase that stuck with me. We spent the morning turning our dining table into a war room. Dad explained the strategy. Sterling Corp had a massive loan coming due next month, a balloon payment they couldn't make because Brad had drained the liquidity for his vanity projects and to cover up the losses in Asia. The bank wants to offload this debt, Dad explained, pointing to a highlighted figure on a spreadsheet. They know Sterling is toxic. They just want to recoup some cash. We go in through Phoenix Holdings, we buy that debt at a discount. Once we own the debt, we own their leverage. I listened, absorbing everything. My background in design taught me to see patterns, and this was just another pattern. A pattern of greed and negligence. I need to go into the city, I said around noon. If I'm going to be the face of Phoenix Holdings eventually, I can't look like Sarah the jilted bride. I took the titanium card Dad had given me and drove the old truck to the nearest rental car place. I rented a sleek, black sedan, understated but powerful. Then, I drove to the high-end district, the same streets where I used to follow Brad like a lost puppy, terrified of looking out of place. I walked into a salon. Cut it, I told the stylist. All of it. The curls, the length. I want something sharp. Something that says don't touch me. When I looked in the mirror an hour later, I gasped. A sleek, angled bob framed my face. My eyes looked bigger, fiercer. I went to the designer boutiques next. No more pastels. No more frills that Victoria Sterling liked. I bought tailored blazers in charcoal and navy, stiletto heels that clicked like weapons on the pavement, and a structured handbag that could double as a shield. I wasn't dressing for a man anymore. I was dressing for war. When I got back to the house, Dad looked up and whistled. Now that, he said, smiling, is a CEO. For the next 2 weeks, we worked in the shadows. Using Phoenix Holdings, we quietly approached the regional banks that held Sterling's debt. They were desperate to sell. They knew the ship was sinking, even if the public didn't yet. Who is this Phoenix Holdings? One banker asked me over the phone. I used a voice modifier, just in case. A private equity firm interested in distressed assets, I replied coolly. We see potential for restructuring. We bought the debt. Then, we started buying the stock. The price was already wobbling because rumors were starting to leak about the wedding disaster. Investors get nervous when family dynasties show cracks. We bought small blocks of shares, staying just under the radar of the SEC reporting threshold for as long as possible. Every night, I checked social media. The Sterlings were trying to do damage control. Victoria posted photos of charity galas with captions about resilience and family values. Brad posted vague, philosophical quotes about forgiveness and misunderstandings. It made my blood boil. They were spinning the narrative. They were probably telling people I was mentally unstable, that I had a breakdown. Patience, Dad reminded me when he saw me gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. When you're hunting a tiger, you don't shoot at the tail. You wait for the head. I know, I said. I just want them to feel it. I want them to panic. They will, Dad promised. We just secured 15% of the voting shares this morning. Combined with the debt we hold, we effectively own the mortgage on their entire existence. We just haven't sent the eviction notice yet. He slid a folder across the table. And speaking of panic, the private investigator sent over the final piece of the puzzle. You need to see this. I hesitated. Is it bad? It's worse than financial fraud, Sarah. It's personal. I opened the folder. And the last remnant of the love I once held for Brad Sterling finally died. It didn't just die, it rotted right there on the table. I thought I knew pain. I thought standing at the altar watching my father be mocked was the height of betrayal. But as I flipped through the glossy photographs in the PI's file, I realized I had only scratched the surface of the Sterling family's depravity. The photos were high resolution. Grainy in some shots taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Brad. My fiancé. The man who swore he was working late nights to secure our future. He wasn't in the office. He was on a yacht. He was in a penthouse suite. He was at a jewelry store, buying a diamond bracelet that I had never received. And he wasn't alone. The woman in the photos was blonde, statuesque, and laughing with her head thrown back. I knew that laugh. I knew that face. It was Jessica. Jessica wasn't just a random woman. She was Tiffany's best friend. She was the maid of honor at the wedding of a mutual friend last year. I had had drinks with her. I had confided in her about my insecurities with Victoria. She had held my hand and told me, "Oh honey, don't worry, the Sterlings are just intense. Brad loves you so much." I felt bile rise in my throat. 2 years, Dad said, his voice grim. The report says it's been going on for 2 years. Since before he proposed to you. 2 years? I whispered. But, why propose to me? Why go through with the wedding? Because Jessica is a party girl, Dad said, tapping the report. She has a record. DUI, shoplifting in college. She's fun for Brad, but she's not wife material for the Sterling brand. Victoria wouldn't approve of her as the face of the family. They needed you. The clean, wholesome, hardworking girl to make Brad look respectable. I flipped to the next page, and my heart stopped. It was a text log. Recovered from a cloud leak. Tiffany, did you get the bracelet he bought? Jessica, yes. It's gorgeous. Way better than the engagement ring he got Sarah. LOL. Tiffany, OMG, don't let her see it. Wait until after the wedding. Once she's locked in with the prenup and popping out babies, she won't be able to do anything about it anyway. Jessica, do you think she suspects? Tiffany, please. Sarah is clueless. She thinks she won the lottery. Just keep Brad happy. We need this merger to look good for the bank. My hands shook so hard I dropped the photo. They knew. It wasn't just Brad. It was Tiffany. It was likely Victoria. The entire family knew that Brad was sleeping with Jessica. They had all laughed at me behind my back. They had plotted to trap me in a marriage, use me as a breeding mare and a PR prop, while Brad continued his life with his mistress right under my nose. Tiffany, who had called my father trash, was encouraging her brother to cheat on his future wife with her best friend. They are monsters, I said, my voice trembling with a cold, hard rage. They aren't just snobs, Dad. They are sociopaths. Yes, Dad agreed. They think people are pawns. They moved you around the board, took your pawn, me, off the table, and thought they won the game. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the overgrown garden my dad tended to. I thought about the lawyer Brad took me to, the custody clauses in the prenup. It was all calculated. If I had caught Brad cheating after the wedding, that prenup would have left me with nothing, and they would have used his money and lawyers to take my children. They had planned to destroy my life before it even started. This changes things, I said, turning back to Dad. I don't just want to take the company. I want to expose them. I want everyone to know. We will, Dad said. But strategy first. Now that we know about Jessica, we have the perfect leverage to destabilize Brad. An emotional enemy makes mistakes. How? Dad pointed to the phone. The PI has a recording. A voicemail Brad left Jessica the night the wedding was cancelled. While he was texting you saying he was heartbroken? He played the audio file. Jess, pick up. It's a disaster. The little idiot walked out. My dad is furious. The bank loan is contingent on the family stability clause. If this wedding doesn't happen, the stocks are going to tank. I need to calm her down. I need to get her back just long enough to sign the papers. Just lay low for a bit, okay? I love you. I love you. He told his mistress he loved her while calling me a little idiot. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was the final purge of the poison. Okay, I said, wiping the tear away. I'm ready. Let's burn it down. Tomorrow, Dad said. We execute the bait. We make them think they have a lifeline, and then we tighten the noose. I looked at the photo of Brad and Jessica one last time, then threw it into the trash can. Goodbye, Brad, I whispered. I hope you enjoyed the yacht. Because you're about to drown. The next morning, we initiated the next phase of Operation Phoenix. We knew Sterling Corp was desperate for cash. Their loans were being called in, and suppliers were halting shipments because of unpaid invoices. They were bleeding out. Dad, acting through our anonymous legal team, sent a formal offer to the Sterling Board of Directors. Phoenix Holdings offers to inject $50 million in immediate liquidity in exchange for convertible notes. It was a lifeline. A trap disguised as a rescue boat. $50 million was enough to keep the lights on for a month or two, just enough hope to make them sloppy. We monitored the fallout through our insiders and social media. The reaction was instantaneous. According to the reports from our mall, a disgruntled accountant dad had managed to flip. The atmosphere in the Sterling mansion was chaotic. Richard Sterling was popping champagne, thinking he had found a stupid investor to bail them out. Victoria was already planning a We Survived gala. But then, we tightened the screws. I picked up my burner phone. It was time to play with my food. I texted Brad. Just a simple message, I'm coming by the apartment to pick up my things. Please be gone. I drove the rental car to the luxury apartment building we used to share. The doorman, who used to look down on me because I drove a Honda, now rushed to open the door for the woman in the tailored suit and designer sunglasses. He didn't even recognize me at first. Miss Jenkins, he stammered. You look different. Life changes fast, Henry, I said, slipping him $100 bill. I won't be long. I went up to the penthouse. I knew Brad would be there. He never listened. When I unlocked the door, he was sitting on the couch, head in his hands. He looked terrible. Unshaven, wearing sweatpants, surrounded by takeout boxes. When he saw me, he jumped up, his eyes lighting up with desperate hope. Sarah! He rushed toward me. Oh, thank God. You came back. I knew you would. I knew you'd realize you were overreacting. I stepped back, holding up a hand. I said, be gone, Brad. I'm here for my grandmother's necklace and my design portfolio. That's it. He stopped, looking confused by my coldness, and even more confused by my appearance. He scanned my new haircut, the expensive blazer. You cut your hair, he murmured. And where did you get those clothes? Did you spend the refund money from the venue? I didn't get a refund, Brad. Your mother made sure of that, I said, walking past him to the bedroom. These are mine. He followed me, his voice taking on that familiar condescending tone. Sarah, look, I forgive you. I forgive you for the scene at the wedding. It was embarrassing, yes, but we can spin it. We can say it was pre-wedding jitters. My parents are willing to overlook it if you apologize publicly. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud as I packed my jewelry into a box. You forgive me? I asked, turning to face him. Brad, you are delusional. I'm not here to get back together. I'm here to close a chapter. Don't be stupid, Sarah, he snapped, his temper flaring. You have nothing without me. You think you can survive in this city on a graphic designer's salary? You'll be back in that trailer with your loser dad within a month. My dad is not a loser, I said quietly, leaning in close. And neither am I. By the way, how is Jessica? Did she like the bracelet? Brad froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Oh, save it, I said, zipping up my bag. I know everything. The yacht. The texts with Tiffany. The little idiot voicemail. I know it all. I walked to the door. He was still frozen, paralyzed by the realization that his safety net was gone. You're crazy, he finally yelled after me. No one will believe you. You're just a bitter ex. We'll see, I said, opening the door. Wait, he shouted, desperation creeping back in. Sarah, please. The bank, the deal, if we don't look stable, this new investor, Phoenix Holdings, might pull out. Just pretend for a few weeks? I'll pay you. I'll give you whatever you want. I stopped. I looked at him with pure pity. You can't afford me, Brad, I said. I slammed the door. As I walked down the hall, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Dad. He's desperate. He mentioned Phoenix. He's terrified we'll pull out. Dad replied instantly, good. Let's give them something real to be terrified about. Release the Kraken. The Kraken was our nickname for the media leak. It was time to let the world know exactly why the Sterling Empire was crumbling. The next morning, the Kraken was released. We didn't go to the tabloids. We went to the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. Dad had contacts, old-school journalists who cared about facts, not just gossip. We sent them the packet, the cooked books, the evidence of Brad using company funds for personal luxury, embezzlement, and the proof of the Asian division's massive losses. Simultaneously, we leaked the lifestyle dirt to Page 6 and TMZ. The photos of Brad and Jessica. The voicemail. The screenshots of Tiffany's texts mocking me. At 8 a.m., the internet exploded. I sat in the kitchen with Dad, refreshing the browser on his iPad. Headline: Wall Street Journal Sterling Corp under investigation, whistleblower alleges massive accounting fraud. Headline: TMZ runaway bride vindication. Sterling heir caught cheating with sister's best friend, leaked audio reveals shocking betrayal. It was a two-front war. On the business side, their stock began to freefall. It opened at $40 a share. By 9:30 a.m., it was trading at $22. On the social side, the public opinion, which had been mixed, swung violently in my favor. The audio of Brad calling me a little idiot while saying I love you to his mistress went viral on TikTok. Women all over the world were duetting it, analyzing Tiffany's cruelty and dragging the Sterling family for filth. Hashtag Team Sarah was trending #1 worldwide. I watched the chaos unfold from the quiet of my dad's kitchen. It felt surreal. Look at the volume, Dad said, pointing at the stock chart. Everyone is selling. The institutional investors are dumping it. They don't want to be associated with a fraud investigation. And the price? I asked. $18.50. It's a fire sale. Time to buy? Time to buy, Dad nodded. We executed the orders. Phoenix Holdings began buying up the Sterling stock that everyone else was throwing away. We bought it by the millions. Because we knew the truth, the core business of Sterling, real estate and manufacturing, was actually sound. It was just managed by idiots. Once we cut out the cancer, the Sterling family, the company would be valuable again. My phone rang. It was Victoria Sterling. I stared at the screen. I had waited 3 years to have the upper hand with this woman. I let it ring until the very last second before answering. Hello? I said, my voice bored. Sarah! Victoria screamed. She sounded hysterical. Make it stop. You did this, didn't you? You leaked those photos. I have no idea what you mean, Victoria, I said calmly. I'm just a graphic designer. I don't have access to your son's private life. Maybe you should ask Tiffany? She seemed to know all about it. You witch, she shrieked. The reporters are outside my gate. They are calling me a monster. Chanel just cancelled my invitation to the gala. Do you know what you've done? I think the term is karma, Victoria. It's a bitch, isn't it? We will sue you. With what money? I asked sharply. I read the journal. Seems like your assets are frozen pending the SEC investigation. Good luck paying a retainer. There was a silence on the other end. A terrifying, realizing silence. Sarah, her voice changed, dropping into a pleading whine that was even more pathetic than her anger. Please. We are family. Brad, he made a mistake. But he loves you. We can fix this. Just tell the press it's a misunderstanding. Tell them you support us. We'll give you the house in the Hamptons. We'll rewrite the prenup. I don't want the Hamptons, Victoria. And I don't want your son. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to attend the emergency shareholders meeting tomorrow, I said. I hear the new investor, Phoenix Holdings, is going to be there to decide the fate of the company. You wouldn't want to miss that. How do you know about Phoenix? She asked, suspicious. I read the news, I lied smoothly. Goodbye, Victoria. I hung up. Dad looked at me and grinned. You're enjoying this. A little, I admitted. Is that bad? Justice feels good, Sarah. Revenge is bitter, but justice? Justice is sweet. By the end of the day, Sterling Corp stock had bottomed out at $12. Phoenix Holdings now owned 51% of the outstanding shares. We also owned their debt. We owned them. Dad printed out the final report. It's done, he said. We are the majority shareholders. We control the board. I looked at the piece of paper that represented the end of the Sterling dynasty. Tomorrow, I said, we go to the office. And this time, I'm not bringing an apple pie. The headquarters of Sterling Corp was a glass monolith in the center of the financial district. I used to feel intimidated just walking past it. Today, I walked toward it knowing I owned the concrete under the foundation. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Dad and I arrived at 9:45. We parked the rental car in the underground garage, in the spot reserved for Chairman Brad's spot. A security guard started to walk over to tell us to move, then saw Dad's face through the window. Dad just held up a piece of paper, the ownership deed. The guard stopped, confused, and backed away. We took the private elevator to the top floor. Inside the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Through the glass walls, I could see them. Richard was pacing, his face purple, shouting into a phone. Victoria was sitting in a corner, wearing sunglasses indoors, weeping into a tissue. Brad was slumped in a chair, staring at the table, looking like a man awaiting execution. Tiffany was there too, frantically typing on her phone, probably deleting her social media accounts. They were waiting for the representative from Phoenix Holdings. They expected a shark from Wall Street. A stranger they could charm, or bribe, or beg. They had no idea. Dad and I stood in the reception area. The receptionist, a kind woman named Martha who Brad had threatened to fire 3 times a week, looked at us. "Can I help you?" she asked. Mr. Sterling said no visitors. They are waiting for a VIP. We are the VIPs, Martha, I said, smiling warmly. Actually, could you do me a favor? When we go in, lock the doors behind us. I don't want anyone running away. Martha looked at me, then at Dad. She saw something in our eyes. Maybe she recognized me from the viral videos. A slow smile spread across her face. Yes, ma'am, she whispered. Ready? Dad asked me, adjusting his tie. It was a new tie. A silk, power red tie. Ready, I said. I smoothed my blazer. I thought about the wedding. I thought about my dad standing in the corner. I thought about the gardener comment. I pushed the double mahogany doors open. The sound of Richard yelling died instantly. Every head turned. What are you doing here? Brad stood up, his face twisting in confusion and anger. Sarah? And Frank? Get out! Security! Martha, why did you let them in? Security isn't coming, Brad, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room without a tremor. We are in the middle of a crisis. Richard roared, slamming his hand on the table. We are waiting for the owners of Phoenix Holdings. Get these peasants out of here before they ruin the deal. Victoria lowered her sunglasses, her eyes red and puffy. Sarah, have you no shame? You come here to gloat? You ruined our lives, and now you show up here? Have some dignity and leave. I agree, Tiffany sneered, though her voice wavered. This is a boardroom, not a garage. Go fix a tire, old man. Dad didn't flinch. He walked calmly to the head of the table, where Richard was standing. Actually, Dad said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder, I think you're in my seat. Excuse me? Richard spluttered, his face turning a dangerous shade of maroon. Are you senile? This is the chairman's seat. Yes, Dad said. And as the owner of Phoenix Holdings, which as of yesterday evening acquired 51% of Sterling Corporation, I am the chairman. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having detonated, where the sound hasn't caught up to the blast wave yet. Brad let out a strangled laugh. What? You? You're a mechanic. You live in a shack. You can't even afford a new suit, let alone a company. Looks can be deceiving, Bradley, Dad said, pulling a sheaf of documents from his briefcase and tossing them onto the polished mahogany table. They slid across the surface and stopped right in front of Brad. Check the signature, Dad said, cold as ice. Brad picked up the papers. His hands were shaking so bad the paper rattled. He read the lines. He read the bank confirmation. He read the name Phoenix Holdings sole proprietor, Frank Jenkins. He dropped the paper as if it had burned him. He looked at his father. He looked at me. No, he whispered. No. That's impossible. You're poor. I'm frugal, Dad corrected. There's a difference. And I'm a billionaire. Richard Sterling grabbed the papers. He scanned them, his eyes bulging. He collapsed into his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a wheeze. It's true, Richard croaked. The funds, the transfer, it came from his accounts. He owns the debt. He owns the stock. He owns everything. Victoria let out a scream of horror, covering her mouth. Tiffany looked like she was going to be sick. I stepped forward, standing next to Dad. I rested my hand on the back of the chairman's chair. Hello, family, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Shall we call this meeting to order? The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently I could almost hear the air crackling. The Sterlings, once giants in their own minds, were now shrinking into their chairs. This is a joke, Tiffany mumbled, tears streaming down her face. Tell me this is a prank show. Where are the cameras? The only joke here is this board's competency, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down directly across from Brad. And the punchline is over. Sarah, Brad started, his voice cracking. He tried to put on his charming face, the one he used to manipulate me, but it was broken. Sarah, babe. Okay, wow. You guys, you really got us. This is amazing. A billionaire? Why didn't you tell me? We could have ruled the world together. We? I raised an eyebrow. There is no we, Brad. You made that clear when you slept with Jessica and had your family mock my father. That was just stress. Brad pleaded, sweating profusely. And the Jessica thing, it meant nothing. It was just physical. You're the one I wanted to marry. Because I was the clean option? I quoted his text messages. Because I was the breeding mare? Brad flinched. I never said. I have the texts, Brad. I have the emails. I have the forensic accounting report. I tossed a second folder onto the table. This one is for the SEC. It details how you siphoned $3 million from the company pension fund to pay for your yacht parties and Jessica's apartment. Richard's head snapped up. You touched the pension fund? I was going to put it back. Brad yelled at his father. I just needed liquidity. You idiot! Richard roared. That's federal prison time. Enough, Dad's voice cut through the bickering. We aren't here to listen to your domestic squabbles. We are here to restructure. Dad stood up, looking every inch the tycoon he had hidden for so long. Richard Sterling, Dad said. You are fired. Effective immediately. For gross negligence and failure to oversee the CEO. You can't do that. Richard sputtered. I built this company. You inherited this company, Dad corrected. And you ran it into the ground. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. Victoria Sterling, Dad continued, turning to her. You hold a ceremonial position on the board for public relations. You are fired. Your salary of $200,000 a year is revoked. Victoria gasped. But how will I live? My expenses. I suggest you learn to budget, Dad said drily. I hear Walmart has great deals. I shop there myself. Then Dad looked at Tiffany. Tiffany. You are on the payroll as a social media consultant. Considering your last contribution was calling the new chairman trash on a live stream, well, I think you can guess. You can't fire me. Tiffany shrieked, standing up. I have rights. You have nothing, Dad said. You are fired. Finally, Dad looked at Brad. But he didn't speak. He looked at me. Sarah? This one is yours. I looked at Brad. He was trembling. He looked small. Pathetic. The man who had criticized my choice of wine, who had told me how to dress, who had made me feel lucky just to be in his shadow. Brad, I said softly. Sarah, please, he whispered, tears in his eyes. Don't do this. I'll change. I'll do anything. I'll sign a new prenup. I'll give you full custody of future kids. Just don't destroy me. I'm not destroying you, Brad, I said. You destroyed yourself. You treated people like objects. You treated my father like dirt because you thought he was powerless. You valued money over character. I leaned forward. You're fired, Brad. And since we are pressing charges for the embezzlement, I'd suggest you save whatever money you have left for a very good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need it. Sarah, he lunged across the table, grabbing my hand. Please. I love you. I pulled my hand away as if his touch was acid. Security, I called out calmly. The doors opened. 4 large men in uniform walked in. They weren't the Sterling security guard. They were private security Dad had hired. "Escort these trespassers off the premises," I ordered. "If they resist, call the police." "No! No!" Victoria screamed as a guard took her arm. "This is my building. You can't do this." "Actually," Dad said, sitting down in the chairman's chair and spinning it slightly. "It's my building. Now get out." We watched them being dragged out. Richard cursing, Victoria weeping, Tiffany screaming insults, and Brad just staring at me with a look of utter horror and regret. When the doors closed, the silence returned. But this time, it was peaceful. Dad looked at me and smiled. "How does it feel, Madam CEO?" I looked at the empty boardroom. I looked at the city skyline outside. "It feels," I took a deep breath, "like justice." The days following the board meeting were a whirlwind of legal activity. We didn't just fire the Sterlings and let them walk away, we held them accountable. My first act as interim CEO was to open the books to the authorities. I handed over every shred of evidence regarding Brad's embezzlement and Richard's complicity in tax evasion. The FBI raid on the Sterling mansion happened 3 days later. It was televised. I sat in my new office, Brad's old office, which I had already redecorated to remove his pretentious leather furniture, and watched the news. The camera crews captured Richard Sterling being led out in handcuffs, looking old and frail without his expensive suits. Brad followed, shielding his face with a jacket, the golden boy finally tarnished. The headlines were relentless. Sterling empire collapses, father and son arrested for fraud. Billionaire mechanic takes over, the Cinderella revenge story. The punishment wasn't just legal, it was social. The high society that Victoria worshipped turned on them instantly. It was brutal to watch, even for me. The same women who had laughed at my dad at the wedding were now giving interviews saying they always knew the Sterlings were shady. Victoria and Tiffany weren't arrested, but they were destitute. The bank foreclosed on the Hamptons estate and the penthouse. The assets that weren't frozen by the government were seized by creditors. Because Richard had signed personal guarantees for many of the company loans, arrogantly assuming the company would never fail, they lost everything. We received updates from our lawyers. Victoria is currently staying in a motel on the outskirts of Jersey, the lawyer told us on a conference call. She's trying to sell her jewelry, but most of it turns out to be fake. Richard apparently sold the real diamonds years ago to cover debts and replaced them with high-quality paste. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She had spent her whole life judging people based on their net worth, and now her net worth was 0. By her own logic, she was now trash. Tiffany tried to become an influencer to make money, launching a Save the Sterlings GoFundMe. It backfired spectacularly. The comment section was a war zone of people reminding her of her trash comments. She had to delete her accounts entirely. As for Brad, he was denied bail because of the flight risk. The yacht photos in international waters didn't help. He was sitting in a holding cell, trading his Armani suit for an orange jumpsuit. One afternoon, a letter arrived for me at the office. It was from Brad. Handwritten from jail. "Sarah, I know you hate me. I deserve it. I sit here every day thinking about that moment at the wedding. I should have punched Marco. I should have told my mother to shut up. I should have defended Frank. I was weak. I was scared of losing my inheritance. The irony is, I lost it anyway, and I lost you. You were the only real thing in my life, and I traded you for an illusion. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I put it in the shredder. "No, Brad," I whispered to the empty room. "You aren't sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you bet on the wrong horse. Forgiveness was something I might find one day, but forgetting? No. I would never forget." and I would never let him back in. 6 months later, the dust had settled. The sterling name was gone from the building. It was now Phoenix Innovations. We didn't just change the name, we changed the soul of the company. Dad and I worked 18-hour days to turn the ship around. We sold the private jets. We sold the yacht. We cut the executive bonuses and used that money to shore up the pension fund Brad had raided. The employees, who had lived in fear under the sterling regime, started to smile again. I implemented a new policy, open doors. Anyone could talk to the CEO. I walked the floor every day, learning the names of the receptionists, the janitors, the junior designers. I wanted to be the kind of leader my father would be proud of. Dad, for his part, refused to take an official office. He preferred to be the senior advisor. He still drove his old truck to work, parking it next to the Teslas and BMWs. It became a symbol of the company, a reminder of where we came from. One rainy Tuesday, I was leaving the office when I saw a figure standing near the bus stop outside. She was huddled under a broken umbrella, wearing a coat that looked too thin for the weather. It was Victoria. She looked 20 years older. Her hair was gray and unkempt, her face lined with stress. She was holding a plastic bag of groceries. I told my driver to stop. I rolled down the window. Victoria? She looked up, startled. When she saw me in the back of the luxury car, her eyes filled with shame. She looked down at her shoes, cheap sneakers, not unlike the ones she had mocked my father for wearing. "Sarah," she whispered. "Do you need a ride?" I asked. I didn't say it with malice. I couldn't be cruel. That wasn't who I was. She hesitated, her pride warring with her misery. Finally, she shook her head. No, I can't. The bus is coming. She looked at me, tears mixing with the rain on her face. You won, she said softly. You really won. It wasn't a game, Victoria, I said. It was life. I rolled up the window and the car drove away. I watched her in the rearview mirror until she disappeared into the gray mist. I felt a heavy sadness, not for her, but for the waste of it all. They had everything, and they threw it away for nothing. Life settled into a new rhythm. A better rhythm. Dad and I bought a new house. Not a mansion, neither of us liked the echoing halls of big estates. We bought a beautiful, sprawling ranch house with a lot of land, about 20 minutes from our old neighborhood. It had a massive, state-of-the-art garage for Dad, where he could fix classic cars just for fun, not because he needed the money. I started a foundation in my mother's name, the Jenkins Grant. We offered scholarships to trade schools and art colleges for kids from low-income families. We helped mechanics, plumbers, artists, and designers, people who worked with their hands and their hearts. I was busy, but I was happy. I was no longer the girl who shrank herself to fit into someone else's box. I was Sarah Jenkins, CEO, philanthropist, and daughter of the coolest billionaire on the planet. One evening, I was hosting a charity gala, a real one, not the vanity projects Victoria used to run. This was to raise money for legal aid for victims of domestic financial abuse. I wore a red dress. Bright, bold red. As I mingled with the crowd, I heard a voice behind me. You look incredible, Sarah. I turned. It was an old friend from college, Mark. He wasn't rich. He was a teacher. He had always been kind to me, but I had drifted away from him when I was with Brad because Brad said teachers were boring. Mark, I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. What are you doing here? I donated, he shrugged, smiling shyly. Not much, but it's a good cause. I saw you on the news. I'm really proud of you. We talked for hours. We talked about books, about art, about his students. He didn't ask me about the stock price. He didn't look over my shoulder to see if there was someone more important in the room. He looked at me. For the first time in years, I felt a spark. Not the fireworks Brad had given me, which turned out to be explosives, but a warm, steady glow. Like a hearth fire. Dad watched us from across the room, raising his glass of sparkling cider to me with a wink. I realized then that my father's money hadn't saved me. His lesson had. He had taught me to value the right things. If I had met Mark 3 years ago, while I was chasing Brad's lifestyle, I would have overlooked him. Now, I saw him clearly. I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick, on a foundation of truth. And it was solid. 2 years later, I was walking out of a restaurant with Mark. We were engaged now. A simple ring, chosen together. No prenup. Just a promise. As we walked to the car, a man stepped out of the shadows. He looked gaunt, older than his years. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit him well. It was Brad. He had been released early on good behavior, but he was a felon now. He could never work in finance again. "Sarah," he rasped. Mark stepped in front of me instinctively, but I put a hand on his arm. "It's okay, Mark. I got this." I stepped forward. "Hello, Brad. You look happy," he said, his eyes scanning my face, looking for the girl he used to control. He didn't find her. "I am," I said. I saw the news. "About the engagement," he said, looking at Mark. "He's a teacher?" "Yes," I said proudly. "He shapes the future." "What do you do now, Brad?" He flinched. I'm working at a car dealership. Used cars. It's a job." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He was selling used cars, a job he would have sneered at his gardener father-in-law for having. I just wanted to say. He struggled with the words. "I miss you." "Not the money. I miss you." I realized, you were the only person who actually liked me for me. Everyone else just liked the sterling name. "I did love you, Brad," I admitted. "But you didn't love yourself enough to be a good man. You let your family define you. And when the name was gone, there was nothing left." Could we grab coffee sometime?" he asked, a desperate hope in his voice. I looked at him. I felt nothing. No anger. No hate. Just indifference. He was a stranger. A lesson I had learned and moved on from. "No, Brad," I said gently. "That chapter is closed. I wish you luck. I hope you find yourself." I turned around and took Mark's hand. "Ready to go?" Mark asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling up at him. "Let's go home." We walked away, leaving Brad standing alone under the streetlight, a ghost haunting a life that no longer existed. The weekend before my wedding to Mark, Dad and I went fishing. We sat on the dock of the lake behind our ranch house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. The water was glass still, reflecting the trees. Dad baited his hook with practiced ease. His hands were still rough, still the hands of a mechanic, even though they now signed million-dollar checks. "You nervous?" he asked, casting his line. "No," I said, dipping my toes in the water. With Brad, I was terrified. I was worried about the flowers, the guests, the dress. With Mark, I just want to be married to him. We could do it in the backyard in jeans and I'd be happy. Dad smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "That's how you know it's real, Sarah. Love isn't a performance. It's a quiet place." We sat in silence for a while, just watching the bobbers float. "Dad," I said. "Thank you." "For what?" "For everything." For the money, yes, it helped. But mostly, for standing in that corner in your old suit. For letting me see the truth. If you hadn't tested them, if you had just written a check for the wedding, I would be trapped in that hell right now. Dad reeled in his line a bit. I took a gamble, Sarah. I was terrified you would choose him. I was terrified I'd lose you to them. You never lost me, Dad, I said, resting my head on his shoulder. I just got lost for a little while. But I found my way back. You did good, kid, he said, kissing the top of my head. You did good. We watched the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about the journey. The pain of the betrayal, the shock of the inheritance, the thrill of the revenge, and finally, this peace. I realized that the $1 billion didn't make me happy. It made me safe, yes. It gave me power, yes. But happiness? Happiness was sitting on a dock with my dad, knowing that we had walked through fire and came out refined, like gold. We caught 2 bass that evening. We cooked them over a fire, laughing and telling stories. It was a simple meal. But it tasted better than any 5-star dinner I had ever eaten. Speaking directly to the camera/audience, voice warm and intimate. I'm telling you this story not to brag about the money or the revenge. Although, I admit, seeing the sterlings fall was satisfying. I'm telling you this because I know there are women out there right now who feel small. Maybe you have a mother-in-law who makes you feel like you aren't good enough. Maybe you have a partner who treats you like an accessory. Maybe you feel like you have to hide where you come from to be accepted. Don't. Never let anyone treat your kindness as a weakness. Never let anyone mock your family. Never trade your dignity for a lifestyle. I learned the hard way that a person who doesn't respect your parents will never truly respect you. They might love what you do for them, or how you make them look, but they don't love you. My dad was a billionaire in disguise, but even if he had $0 in the bank, he was richer than the Sterlings ever were. He had honor. He had love. If you are in a relationship that feels like a performance, walk off the stage. If you are standing at an altar, literal or metaphorical, and your gut is screaming that something is wrong, listen to it. Throw the bouquet. Call off the wedding. Drive away in the rusted truck. It will be scary. You might feel like you've lost everything. But I promise you, you are just making room for the right things to find you. I'm Sarah Jenkins. I was a runaway bride, a vengeful CEO, and now, I'm just a happy woman living a life that is truly mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about truth, justice, and finding your power. Remember, you are worth more than gold. See you in the next video. And so, this story leaves us with a profound reminder: true wealth is not measured by the numbers in a bank account, but by the strength of one's character and the values we uphold. Sarah's journey teaches us that dignity, self-respect, and unwavering love for those who truly matter are worth more than any material possession. It is a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity, even when the world tries to diminish your worth. Her father's quiet resilience and Sarah's bold courage show us that the path to happiness often requires sacrifice, but it also requires faith in yourself and the belief that you deserve better. We are reminded that it's never too late to reclaim your power, to walk away from toxicity, and to build a life that reflects your true values and dreams. What did this story mean to you? Share your thoughts below or simply comment good if this lesson resonated with your heart. Let's continue the conversation and inspire each other to value what truly matters.